The farmstead was first developed in 1726 when a Flemish-style bond brick house was built by William and Catherine Cox. A bank barn was added in the 1760s. Pete Seeley's ancestors, the Mitchells, took over the property in 1868, and he's been caretaking the site for the past decade.
I was commuting from home about an hour each direction and eventually decided to kind of move in before I purchased the property. So that was about 5 years of just back and forth commuting. And I said, enough with this. I'm going to move down here and kind of keep an eye on the property a little bit better and make more productive use of my time. So it's really been about 10 years of my time that I've actually been able to put my full-time effort into the property and fixing it up.
The farm, which was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2017, has avoided development.
The property itself might be worth something, but the buildings are all a liability because they're not in the best of condition. So, yeah, people would love this property, but I think now with it being on the Historic Register, that it makes it harder for a developer to rip it down. But when they built the neighborhood here, this was the leftover parcel that they did not want because of the creek and the hillside. It's kind of a lot of swampland and unwanted property. So the developers had to keep a certain amount of open space per all the development regulations, and this is just what was left of it. And my tricky point now looking into the future is really how to make most productive use of the property. And I'm trying to really respect my neighbors who are all very close by. I maybe have 12 houses around me and 100 new neighbors, so I can't turn this into a commercial venue or anything. And people say it would make a great bed and breakfast, but that would just cost a fortune to make the property set up to that point where the barn could be used for venues.
Seeley admits upkeep on such a historical location is not easy, physically or financially.
So it's a little tricky. So I'm trying to do farming. I have the apple trees that I planted, and that's not making me any money. And it just looks nice. It doesn't bother the neighbors. They don't smell bad. They don't have bugs. So, my neighbors appreciate that. But so it's tricky. It's really tricky. So going forward, I just am just trying to maintain the property, and the historical renovations are the most tricky part of everything that I do. So it's maintaining the buildings, and there's about 8 buildings here, and they're all in different needs of repair. Some are decent, so other ones need a whole lot of work. But the original structure of most of them is intact, and it was the other additions that they added on that were a little sloppier and need more work, but they're all historic. So they all need to be treated as historic, additions. And it's a lot of work, it's a lot of thinking, it's a lot of money, and it's very slow. So I'm not in any rush, and that's the hardest part, I think, for most people, is they want to get in and do things right away, and they ruin the historical fabric of buildings. And so, it's a very slow process, and hopefully eventually I'll be done. Probably never.
The buildings are now a mix of old and new.
The harder part is being on the historic register. There's different categories, and some require you to do exactly proper historic renovations, and the one that we're under does not require that. So I can put things like regular asphalt shingles on the roof. I don't have to go back and do cedar shingles. So it recognizes what's left of the property and the historic aspects inside. So when you get inside into the basement, there's the hand-hewn timbers still present in the basement that have been there for the whole 300 years, and they're protected by the new asphalt roof. So in a way, that's better for protecting the property than trying to make it look, really fancy and old.
For Seeley, it's definitely a labor of love.
It is, absolutely, and that's one of the only reasons I stayed. I really enjoyed coming up here, and it was like a trip back in time where you pull up the driveway and you see all the old buildings, and you almost forget that you're in this century. It's pretty crazy. And my grandma, it was just 100 years ago, remembered things like getting on the sleigh and getting a sleigh ride in the wintertime with the horses and things. And there's a hitch post up there where they used to attach their wagons to and the horses. And there's an old gas pump. So before there were gas stations around here, my grandma remembers her first car when she was in college. She used to pay, I think, 13 cents a gallon, and her father charged her for the gas, but she had the pump right there to get the fuel. There's all kinds of little stories like that that are, kind of passed on, and just interesting aspects of life. But it was very, very quiet. It was a very boring lifestyle, and it was very repetitive, and still is. We just mow the lawn and do basic, landscaping, and it's just very boring work. But when you look at what you're left with, it's pretty neat to look at least. It's pretty cool.
Seeley also appreciates the local support from Historical Society members, neighbors, and local officials.
And that's what makes the work all worth it, I think. It's when people say, hey, that really looks cool, I really appreciate that you're here doing the work. That definitely makes the job that much more tolerable. It is definitely a love-hate relationship, I guess, and a labor of love and all those things. I just hope that in the future I can make it more productive and make more use of it agriculturally without having to turn it into a bed and breakfast or something like that.
The farmstead has deep ties to the Quaker community, was neighbors to Delaware's Native American tribes, and was reportedly a last stop on the Underground Railroad before slaves seeking freedom crossed over into Pennsylvania. Mike Phillips, WDEL Delaware's News Radio.